Good afternoon, members, and welcome to the November meeting of the Standards Committee. First task is to appoint a chairperson. So could I have nominations for chair? I think Mr. Pugsley's hand was up first.
I'd like to propose Mr. Petrinos.
Thank you. Seconded. Thank you. Do I have any other nominations? There being none, Mr. Petrinos, would you like to come and be the chair? Thank you.
Everybody else gets to do it, don't you? I shouldn't. Right, election of deputy chair. Do I have any nominations? Mr. Elliott, please. Stephen Pugsley. Seconded. All those in favour? I should have said any other nominations, shouldn't I? You are, of course, deputy chair. Stephen. Public speaking. As I know, there are no members of the public to speak. If it's okay with you members, I'd like to move items 6 and 7 to later on in the agenda, between items 10 and 11. Is that okay?
Happy? Yeah.
Okay. Minutes. Minutes of the... I've lost my glasses. We have the minutes of 14th of November 2023.
Oh, microphone.
Oh, not doing very well at this. Right, we have the minutes of the 23rd of November, 14th of November 2023. It's something I'd like to move them as a correct record.
I would. Thank you.
Seconded? All those in favour? None com. Is there any matters arising from those minutes? I'll go through them page by page. There's only 3 pages. Page 1. Page 2. And page 3. No? Okay. Public speaking. Nobody's speaking publicly. Everybody's okay with moving items 6 and 7 to after item 10, yes? So that brings us on to item 8, which is the member training and development programme, which is something that we sort of tangentially discussed earlier on today. In it, we'll see that there's a training development programme and also a suggested draft member role to make it clear to members what their purpose is in the authority. Is there an officer presenting this?
Happy to give it a brief introduction, Chairman. So following the Greville review of July 2019, this included measures to bring about improved performance, and part of those proposals included a standard members role profile, and also regular skilled audits and improved training. So what we have in this report is a suggested member role profile for your review and consideration, which is Appendix 1, and a revised member training and development programme, which is Assessment Appendix 2. Additionally, in the third appendix, we have a process for the annual member development reviews, which we heard in the member forum this morning, an update from our authority chairman. So that's pretty much all I need to say about that one. From the committee to review really appendices 1, 2 and 3 for any suggestions for change.
Thanks, Ben. Can I suggest we start with Appendix 1, which is the suggested member role. Do members have any comments? Stacey.
Thank you. Chairman, I think it's really important, particularly for new members, and we've always had to perform inductions, and then we're not quite sure how much information is absorbed at the time of the induction, and then everyone gets very, very busy, and people are then nominated to serve on different committees and to represent the authority outside of the authority. So I think this is a really good move. I think this is fairly comprehensive. One of the key issues is the conflict where people aren't sure whether they represent the authority or whether they represent the organisation that nominates them. And so I think this is a good move, and I would certainly support the sentiments in Appendix 1.
Thanks very much. Yeah. I mean, the only comment I would make is that it might be worthwhile mentioning as a strapline or something somewhere the Nolan principles, just to reinforce it with new members. Because I know that the way we get new members, in a local authority you get a whole new bunch at the same time. Here we get them dribs and drabs, and they can be coming in for months and months from different sources. So it would be good to have something consistent. Am I right in thinking that the idea would be that when a new member is inducted into the authority, they would get a copy of this and have it explained to them, and it would be as part of the training plan? Okay. Mr. Pugsley.
With respect, Mr. Chairman, I suspect that all current members ought to have it as well, particularly bearing in mind some of the informal discussion that we had earlier about the fact that some members are perhaps less clear about their roles than others. So I think it would be helpful if there was a members' training session when these documents were introduced and understood by all members at the earliest possible opportunity. I did notice that the Nolan principles were actually mentioned in this, but I'm immediately searching to find it, but they're there somewhere.
Page 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines down.
There you go.
You can just spell them out.
I was thinking of actually spelling out the principles, as opposed to referring to them.
Okay.
Sorry, Chairman, can I have another?
You certainly. Can I just say that we have the two independent persons here, and if you have anything you feel you want to contribute, please just wave your hand, and I'll let you. Yeah.
Thank you.
You raised the issue that quite often, instead of a tranche of new members, we have individual new members. And it could be outside of what's currently written, that it would be good to have something like the buddy system, where an experienced, longer-serving member can actually act almost as a mentor for the first 6 months for the new members. Because I can remember being a new member, and that was a very long time ago, but it took me probably 12 months to understand fully everything that was expected of me. The then chairman was a political appointee. I had some difficulty, I mean, these things perhaps don't happen now, but I had some difficulty in just negotiating the issues as a Secretary of State appointee, and it would have been great to have someone who was a mentor that I could actually turn to, and I probably would have become much more efficient more quickly. That's just something to bear in mind.
Yeah, certainly a good idea. Something we ought to build in. Perhaps there's a point 13, all that sounds unlucky. Are we happy with Appendix 1 then?
Yeah.
Let's move on then to Appendix 2, which is the Annual Member Learning and Development Programme, which really just formulates a lot of what actually happens at the moment. Is there anything missing or excessive in there? Sounds like not. Sounds like not. So, I think we can certainly adopt this with a view to perhaps flexing it if it's required for any particular reason. One reason might be the new member role we just talked about doing. We can certainly build that into the training, the appropriate training here on the standards regime and the members' code of conduct. Although that isn't actually scheduled until next September, which sounds an awfully long time away. So if there's an opportunity to bring that earlier, that would be useful. Mr. Pugsley.
I'm very mindful of the fact that we do quite rightly focus a lot on the planning training that we should receive. And it's important that we have it, and it's important that the members undertake it. There is one area where I do sometimes feel that we sit here with a glazed look all too often, and that refers to the financial matters that we have to consider, and which are so very important to the authority. And I do sometimes feel that we ought to have more finance training, well, in fact, any finance training, because it doesn't really happen. We do grapple with significant numbers and significant principles, and I think that some members are all too happy to sit there and let it wash over them. And I think having real engagement and understanding of some of the issues would be very helpful.
Well, Mrs. Stacey.
Yeah, I think having conducted trustee training in the past, a voluntary board on several occasions, I think just the ability to understand a set of accounts is really important, and I'm following on from what Stephen said, that could be a unit of training. That would be really, really important.
Can I ask officers to have a look at inserting an appropriate place on the programme? Mr. Ellicott.
I think what's coming to light is the importance of training, generally. There's many times I have sat in a meeting and squirmed when I've seen people performing, and thought, a little bit of hindsight, or at least training, would have prevented that happening, whatever they were saying at the time. It doesn't just stop at the door here as you leave either. A lot of it goes on outside, and it's important that we convince people that what happens here stays here to begin with, unless it's in a public meeting that it's when it is public knowledge. But I've been in the position here when I've heard things, or when I'm outside, when I've heard things that we held a meeting here that wasn't public, and that is important. It's important that we teach the members, all the members, the importance of what they're representing and the consequences of what their actions are.
I understand what you mean, because what you mean is members informally discussing a range of options about what might be the future way forward, and then perhaps overhearing some of the rejected options outside, which is inappropriate because it's irrelevant. It's not a question of secrecy, it's just a question of transparency. So subject to Mrs. Stacey.
Just following on from what was said by our auditors, I think it's important that this document is seen as a living document, and it may change subject to legislative changes or statutory instruments, that kind of thing. That we'll be able to say that yes, we're reviewing through the Standards Committee the effectiveness of the authority, but this needs to be reviewed on an annual basis. Now shut up.
So subject to those amendments we just mentioned, we're all happy with this programme as a starter. So that brings us, sorry.
Do you need a vote?
Do we need to vote on each individual one? I thought we were going to vote at the end. That brings us to Appendix 3, which is an outline of the annual member training and development programme. And what it does is the first time I've seen it set out clearly in black and white so people know what the impression, what the expectation is. And it also introduces, I don't think I've done one before, I've forgotten, the self-assessment questionnaire. Any comments, members, or independent people? No? Everybody happy? Excellent. Right. So, subject to the slight amendments we've mentioned, would somebody like to move acceptance of these 3 appendices? Thank you, Mr. Pugsley. Seconded? Thank you, Mr. Ellicott. All those in favour? Unanimous. Item 9. Family committee substitute. Something we're looking forward to.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got very little to say about this one in terms of introduction, but the report really is an opportunity for you as members to consider the operation and efficacy of the revisions to the planning committee arrangements over the past 6 months, with particular focus on the required substitutes and also the required notice periods. It's really a prompt for you and a discussion point that you can take any recommendations to full authority at its next meeting.
Thank you. Yeah. When I read this, I went and double-checked standing orders just in case there had been something missed out, because I was under the apprehension, perhaps misapprehension, that when there was a planning substitute, it had to be from the same type of member. So we have some set council appointees, parish council appointees, district council appointees, county council, you know, there's different types. And therefore, for example, I'm a North Devon Council appointee and I'm on the Planning Committee. I thought that if I was going to be substituted, it would have to be by the only other North Devon Council appointee. But it doesn't actually say that in standing orders. Did I misinterpret it, or?
It doesn't have to be from the same. It can be anyone you choose. It can be any member that you choose. It doesn't have to be from the same grouping.
Okay. Well, that's reassuring. I didn't realise.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, my misapprehension. I got it like entirely wrong. I don't know why. Mr. Pugsley.
But nevertheless, the planning committee has to reflect the makeup of the authority, doesn't it? So in terms of its breakdown of Secretary of State appointees and local government appointees, we've got to try to preserve the same balance.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Yeah. So therefore, if you said, I can't go, and I'm going to ask a Secretary of State appointee to substitute for me, that would change the balance.
I thought the chair's point was it had to be from your same area, as it were, rather than.
So, in other words, a North Devon member could ask another local government member to represent them.
Yeah.
So, could we have some clarity then? If a parish member can't attend, are they counted as a Secretary of State appointee? Strictly speaking, or would they have to ask another parish member? Because it makes it easy for the local government members who are, you know, the councillors. You can have Somerset, North Devon, Devon County Council. But can a parish member only ask a parish member, and can a Secretary of State only ask a Secretary of State? Otherwise, the balance will change.
I suppose that's particularly pertinent for the Secretary of State appointees.
Yeah.
So if you want,
Yeah, exactly.
Mrs. Stacey.
Well, when I haven't been able to attend, and luckily it's not been often, I am quite confident that my fellow Secretary of State appointees will fill the gap, and we are in touch with one another prior to the authority meetings. However, we're all very clear that were it to be the case that none of them could help out on that particular meeting, then I then would throw it open to the rest of my colleagues on the authority to ensure that we quorate. But to date, it hasn't been an issue. I've been able to attend most of the meetings, and the one that I wasn't able to attend, then I think it was Laura who stepped in so that we kept the balance. And because these meetings aren't, are they every month or is every?
Well, it
can be, but so far we haven't had an issue with Secretary of State coverage. But they're all very clear that if for any reason none of them could assist, then I would just go to the authority generally.
Yeah. My thing is, my question is about what it actually says in standing orders.
Yeah.
I mean, what it says in standing orders is these two things here about being able to nominate a substitute member who's properly trained,
Yeah.
and then it gives time periods, which we will no doubt come on to next. And then separately in standing orders, it talks about appointing members to the committee, but it doesn't tie the substitute members to the appointment process.
No.
So we can appoint anybody, yeah, which is fine.
Well, if that's the case, but that's why I was just trying to double check with Mr. Yendall, because if the planning committee has to reflect the parent authority, it could be that actually there's a prevenient standing order effectively that overarches the standing orders of the planning.
Mr. Yendall.
The point about the Secretary of State, the Environment Act says that parish council members are appointed by the Secretary of State. So, the standing order simply said that they must nominate a substitute member who is permitted to attend in their place, as long as they've undergone the training. So
They're very different appointees.
they are very different appointees. So the balance is between local authority members and Secretary of State members.
On the authority or on the planning committee? Sorry.
On both. Yeah. So I think that answers the question.
So therefore then, we should seek for our substitute to be within the same use class, so to speak, so that we preserve the balance.
Ideally, yeah.
So can I just ask why? I mean, individuals are members of the planning committee. They apply the planning rules to the best of their judgment, according to the training they received, and it's not as if we would expect a Secretary of State appointee to make a different decision to a local authority appointee or a parish council appointee, is it? I mean, individuals might make different decisions about an individual application, but it's not as if there's going to be some... If there is some persistent difference in interpretation of the planning rules, then we have a problem. Mrs. Taylor.
I think that as this is regarded as an experimental period, my understanding was that we were preserving the balance of local authority, Secretary of State, local appointees, parish appointees, because we weren't moving too far away from the authority make-up during this experimental period. And that's as the Secretary of State appointees understand it as a group. And I think that's how the local authority appointees understand it. Yeah. And so, you know, this isn't a change forever. At the moment we're in a sort of experimental period, and we're not going too far away from the makeup of the authority. Isn't that right?
Oh, sorry.
I think it's important that, for the sake of this experiment that we're doing at the moment, that we are seen to be covering all the aspects of what the membership, the different sections of the membership that was put together originally. It's in the public's eye. I'm not saying that there would be a different decision or a different group would vote any different than anybody else. I'm just saying that in the eyes of the public, if it was an application that came in from someone and, for example, it was refused, they may turn around and say, well, they've overloaded the committee with a certain section of the members, whereby if it's like we're working at the moment with the right proportion of Secretary of State members, County Council members or Council members and parish members, that argument wouldn't be sufficient. They would accept it. So it's whatever we do, it must be seen to be fair in the eyes of the general public.
I mean, I'm getting the impression that the idea is to leave it as it is for the time being, see how it pans out. Yeah. The other thing we need to talk about though is the time. Sorry.
So I was just going to say, the standing orders say the subcommittees should be in a similar proportion or the same proportion as the main authority, so that's why it's set up the way it is. And that derives from the Local Government Act.
Does it detail the three groups, or is it simply local authority and Secretary of State?
It says local authority and Secretary of State.
And the slight difficulty we've got, I think, is we've got a bit of a lack of clarity about whether parish or Secretary of State or not, and I think we need to go and take that away and come back. Because when I've spoken to DEFRA on this, they've told me that parishes are not, although they're appointed by the Secretary of State, they're not Secretary of State when you are considering the balance of Secretary of State appointees and local authority, they're grouped with local authority. But I would like to go away and sort of check that. But I think the point Evelyn made early on about if she's not able, should it be another Secretary of State? My view would be yes, it should.
And it's worked so far.
Yeah. But there's basically the question, well, what if you can't? What if, and if there are no Secretary of State on the planning committee, are we call it? Because we only have to have
Absolutely.
one. No, so if there are none,
There are none, yeah.
and you have 4 local authorities, you'll call it in numbers but not in type.
There's Dominic
Gosh.
and me, and we have and
You see, we don't get these complications if we're all members of the planning committee.
I mean, I think it's almost like we're searching for problems here.
Yeah,
We don't need to search for problems.
Sorry, I'm being flippant.
Mr. Pugsley.
Thank you.
Are we-
So, moving on to the other issue, Mr.
Good.
Chairman, which is the notice period. I think, practically speaking, one thing that really has shown itself as being quite difficult is having to give 10 working days' notice. Because with the best will in the world, sometimes, of course, people really do know that their holidays are coming up, but very often it's last-minute stuff like hospital visit or which I know we allow for, but even so, sometimes it's not you that's got to go, it's somebody else, and it might be a routine thing, and do you try and change it around or do you not, or the car's got to go into the garage and you haven't realised it 2 weeks before, or whatever. And my experience with other authorities is that they do actually tend to work on a couple of days' notice rather than anything more than that, maximum. So I do think that 10 working days is a bit of a luxury, to be honest, and it does seem to have thrown up some issues. Indeed, Mr. Ellicott was denied the opportunity to sit on the planning committee recently because he was a named substitute, but it was deemed that the person he was substituting for had not got a fit and proper reason within the 2 weeks to give the notice. So I would have said that something like 2 working days, and even then, some might say, well, that's too much. but 2 working days is probably a reasonable figure.
Can I just suggest, I mean, something akin to that, which is to say, sufficient time for the substitute member to have familiarised themselves with the agenda.
Well, if you can't do it in 2 days, it's...
Oh, I know, but you don't need to specify. Some people read faster than others.
I've managed to do it within 10 days.
The only thing is, I think you've got to, conversely, make sure that the staff here have got the opportunity to be able to log properly the replacement, and if necessary, and if there's other materials that have got to be sent to them, emailed to them or whatever, they've got the administrative opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I'm only throwing that out there. The Chief Executive might feel actually that is too short a time and it won't work administratively, but I think it needs to be something nearer that than 10 days.
Yeah, I would agree, Mr. Chairman. I think I could foresee situations where it might feel a little bit last minute. So I think I would prefer it if it was perhaps 3 days, that sort of, would that be reasonable? Yeah.
3 working days.
3 working days, yeah. It still allows for the exceptional circumstances when somebody, which is already there, so this is a planned, I'm not going to be able to be there, there might still be, I've come down with COVID this morning or something.
Yeah. But yes, you've still got the help.
Yeah.
So just then, in practical terms, that would mean that you would have to have registered your substitute by Wednesday 5 o'clock preceding an next on Tuesday, because then the working day would be Thursday, Friday, Monday. And I think if members understand, you know, they have to sit and, oh, what day does that mean I've got to do it by? If you know you have got to have, by the previous Wednesday at 5 o'clock, have registered, then that should be fairly clear in everybody's minds.
Yeah. Stacey.
Just going on from that, I think it would be very useful to have a list of people who've had the sufficient training as a pool of substitutes. Because, you know, I know my cohort have the training, but if we're looking wider at either the parish council group or the local authority group, we need to ensure that whoever you're picking as the substitute has actually had the adequate training and so is therefore eligible to be the substitute. Just some kind of list of who's eligible, please.
Fine, so we're talking about changing in the standing order, recommending that council change the 10 working days to 3 working days, and then as a matter of administration, making sure that members know who's been trained.
Yeah, the planning committee members need to know who they can pull in to substitute.
Is somebody ready to move that?
Move it.
Yeah. Seconded? Thank you. In favour? Unanimous. Thanks very much. Which brings us on to item 10. The arrangements for dealing with standard allegations under the Localism Act. Item 10, arrangements for dealing with standards allegations under the Localism Act 2011. And we had a very long report with a number of documents appended. Mr. Barrett.
Thank you, Chairman and members. So contained in the report, which is quite lengthy, are the current arrangements for dealing with standards allegations under the 2011 Localism Act, which is Appendix 1, as well as our summary guide for members on complaints about member probity or behaviour, and that's Appendix 2. So members of the Standards Committee are invited to review these documents, or have done over the past few days, to consider whether, firstly, the documents remain fit for purpose, they still represent what we feel, they still represent the law and our requirements, or whether there are any minor amendments which are required, which you as a Standards Committee wish to propose to full authority, or perhaps more significantly, where the committee would like to meet as a working group outside of this to undertake a full review of the arrangements and submit a revised version to a future meeting of the standards and therefore full authority. So that's why we've kind of included all the current arrangements in this report for you to actually digest and consider.
Members, are you happy to meet informally as a working group so we can go through it, because there's such a lot of it? Yeah. Okay, good.
Would it be appropriate to have an independent person available in that working group, please?
Do I have a volunteer independent person or two?
I would be very happy to attend, so yeah, and would
Well,
think
that's
Thank you.
appropriate as well.
Thank you.
So nothing.
Excellent. Excellent, thanks. So, I mean, so really we've disposed of that item then, item 10. Subject to the report back of the working group. Which brings us on to item 11, which is the role of the independent person. And I certainly hope there are two independent persons. It sounds so silly saying persons, doesn't it? Anyway, I have some contribution to this. Now, Mr. Barrett, could you introduce this?
Thank you, Chairman. Just give a very brief introduction. We've kind of almost touched on this in the last item in terms of inclusion in working groups. This was to be the final committee report of the day, but obviously we've got a couple of others to go through after this. We've set out here the key elements of the role of the independent person, as well as suggesting other contributions which could be sought from our independent persons. E.g., we've disclosed in the report, such as an annual statement of observations, suggested improvements for our current processes, and all details of member training requirements if you spot an area where there is clearly a need, such as finance, as we've already seen in previous committee items. So the committee is really asked to consider whether it wishes to request any additions to the role of independent persons, whether the independent persons consider that they have a wider role and a wider remit, which they are interested in and kind of engaged in wanting to achieve. So that's really what the report is trying to assess, really. We value our independent persons, and we really like to see this potentially improve our member governance.
Can I have your comments?
There's a mic, just switch on the top of the mic.
Thank you. During our appointment process, there was a lot of expectations raised from members, standing committee, as well as officers, about what the independent people could add, perhaps, to during the work. And I think it was important that we clarified those expectations during this phase, as we are understanding our role. Which is the start of the conversation we had last time. It's been very well set out what our legal requirements are, and I think that's above all our position, is to remain objective and independent for the case that we are actually called to do our work underneath under the Act. So well done, thank you very much for that. When it comes down to creating extra work, I think both of us are very keen on not creating additional work. Yes, not creating additional work for members or even for ourselves. And we're very happy to do it, but let's not make a formal requirement. We stand up once a year and present something if there's been no cause to do that. What I missed?
No, it's a matter, I think, of feeling that we are meeting your expectations, but not, as Adam's just said, in making any additional work for any, particularly not for the authority who has sufficient to do already. So that was the only thing, that if there is something that you think that we could consider to help fulfil what the authority is trying to achieve, then yes, that would be great. But we don't want to do more than is necessary because of the constraints.
I can quite understand that, and nobody wants more work than they necessarily need. But I mean, I think part of the idea was to try and encourage you to give feedback on what we're doing well or badly, rather than just hope that you give feedback on what we do well. You know, I think that was the idea, to try and give some stimulus to it, perhaps, because it's very easy to sit around a table and see faces you've often seen for years, and then become blind to your own qualities, or lack of them. So that's what I hope you'll be able to bring. Mr. Ellicott.
Thank you. 2 points. One, I think it's very, very important, at the risk of embarrassing you both, that we do have an independent person, because they're looking at it from with a different pair of eyes. So I think it's very important to have that person, that representation, looking in from the outside at what we're doing, and scrutinise us, and be prepared to tell us if we're going wrong at any time, with a whole range of things, behaviour and everything else. But the other point, are we allowed to continue? We haven't got a quorum.
Mr. Endel.
Yeah, it's fine.
It's fine, is it?
Yeah, it's a quorum of 3. One to be appointed by the Secretary of State, coming back to this point. Appointed by the Secretary of State, and the Environment Act says that parish members are appointed by the Secretary of State.
So whilst it might not be desirable, Mr. Ellicott, it is permissible.
It takes me back to the discussion we were having earlier on.
Yeah.
We seem to use that when it suits us, and not other times, because I've represented a government appointee before, or been asked to, or said, oh, we're okay because Mr. Ellicott's a government appointee, and we're now arguing about whether that is true or false.
Thanks. Well, we've got a legal opinion. Perhaps our independent person. People have a view. Sorry about that. Mr. Presley.
I think having a good relationship with our independent people is the key, and if you've basically got the roles requirements which are stated, which are relatively straightforward and quite basic, but then from time to time there may be things that you will invite the independent people to do or to comment on. I mean, I get the feeling that you're not rushing to take on extra responsibilities within the appointment, but I think it is true that from time to time, even if it isn't one of the regular requirements of the post, having the opportunity to hear from you about your observations, possibly in an informal way rather than in the course of the meeting, is really helpful, because you have the opportunity to stand back and take an objective view about how we're operating. I would caution, however, that what we don't want to have happen, because it's not fair to you, is what perhaps might have happened in the past, where the relationship with the independent person broke down because there was a sense on the part of some members that the independent person was going beyond their brief. And that isn't fair, it's not fair to you. So I think we need to be cautious in how we approach it. But if we can perhaps do it on a rather more ad hoc basis rather than specifying additional responsibilities, that would strike me as the way to go at this stage, even if it develops into something else over the course of time.
I generally agree. Just I don't think we ought to inhibit you from if you feel it's appropriate, stepping beyond what you think is your brief, because we can always pull out about it. Then Mrs. Daniel.
So I agree. I think from an ad hoc, time to time basis, it's absolutely possible and probably quite good for us all to do it. Specifically also because we'll be able to identify exactly what you're asking us at that time, and that will be coming out of what's happened in the last few months. So a specific question addressed occasionally, absolutely happy to take that on. What I was trying to avoid is that there's a formal requirement that we stand up and say something intelligent every 12 months. That would be that would just cause us difficulties, I think. One extra point I would like to flag up is that we have been sat in practically all of the meetings, or most of the meetings, and members have seen that. I think it's important to refer back to the members. We're learning, and this is why we're here a lot. So you will be seeing us a lot at the start. It might change. We might get the hang of it, and the rhythm of us turning up to meetings might change. And I was very keen to make that clear to the other to all members, that we're not here as thought police. We're really here to learn at the moment.
Yeah, and I'd agree with Adam on that. The thing is that to maintain a level of objectiveness, it sort of is helped by not being too involved in the machine, as it were, because then you do get to view things perhaps with fresher eyes. So I think that is a very valid point. And also, I mean, at this point, having 5 meetings sort of under a belt kind of thing, 4 or 5, can't remember now exactly, is that our report to date would be very slim indeed. So there is nothing has happened, but maybe that's the point, is that when something did happen, then perhaps that you could call on us to have a review of something, and that then we would report back. The only other thing in that, under the items here on 2.4, it says details of any member training requirements identified, and that sort of sounds very, very broad as to all training that might be identified for members, and it's like, I'm not entirely sure that would be in our role to look at, especially after the last meeting. It's sort of like, is it in relation to issues that occur rather than across all areas?
The way you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I read that was that if you saw something, say you thought that that you'd watched today's meeting and the planning meeting, and then you thought, God, none of them can chair a meeting. What we need is to have some chairing training, something like that. I mean, it wouldn't necessarily be within your role, but it'd be something you would have observed with outside eyes. Hopefully you haven't. Is that right?
Yeah, sorry, that was just for clarification in there, because otherwise it reads a bit broad.
I don't think it's kind of throwing you the job of drawing up the training programme. No, it's just saying, look, there's something wrong there. Let's sort that. Yeah, I think, are we all kind of agreed then on the way forward? Is that okay? We don't need to move anything about that, do we? No. Excellent. Well, thanks very much. So going back then to the items we moved to the end of the agenda, and actually I moved into before that item, sorry, I got that wrong, it brings us to the annual governance review 2023-2024.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I do need to bring my sincere apologies to the committee. It's down to my quite major oversight on my behalf that this item is coming now to a standards committee rather than the one back in March 2024, when it would have been most timely to have done so. With me starting back last autumn, I just wasn't fully aware of the requirement at that point and overlooked it essentially. But essentially what you have here is three main parts of this report. The annual governance review, which is page up to page 9. We have the annual governance self-assessment, pages 9 to 11, and the annual governance statement, which has been included in our statement of accounts, which is pages 13 to 16. Now, those that were present for the final accounts committee, which was the previous recorded meeting to this, will have heard a recommendation in regards part 2 of this, which is the governance self-assessment the members' self-assessment in section 9. Essentially, the first section, our annual governance review, is relatively lengthy tone, but it details our compliance with kind of 7 key areas. Our behaving with integrity, strong commitment to ethical values, essentially known as principles, ensure an openness and comprehensive stakeholder engagement, defining our outcomes in terms of sustainability, economic and social environmental benefits, determining the interventions necessary to optimise achievement of the intended outcome, developing our entity's capacity, including capacity of leadership and the individuals within it, and managing risks and performance through robust internal control and strong public financial management, and then finally implementing good practice and transparency in reporting and audit to deliver effective accountability. So in each of those sections we have essentially described what we do and what processes we have to achieve those elements. So that's the annual governance review. I'll take any questions that members have in those areas.
Members? Nothing? I mean, one of the things is the self-assessment, which
well, I was just going to double check if I may then, Mr. Chairman, that the Audit Committee self-assessment, as detailed in this report, will satisfy the request of the auditors that we've heard in the previous meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Buckley. Yes, essentially this was planned, and it does actually fulfil the recommendation made in our value for money report in the previous.
So we have responded within half an hour to the auditor's request.
One thing though, I mean, in previous authorities I've been with, this sort of self-assessment was sent around to members of the audit committee for them to individually mark, put their ticks against all the various boxes, and they were sort of aggregated or, in order to get some sort of composite self-assessment by the members of the committee of it. Whereas this is a little bit different. I can understand because of the time pressure, but what's the plan for next year?
Thank you, Chairman. Essentially, this item will be brought before the committee in the March Standards Committee meeting. So we will have our annual governance statement draft. We'll have this self-assessment for 24-25, because this self-assessment here is relating to the 23-24 financial year. I do believe there's a bit of crossover here, because whilst this is for the audit committee as a whole, what you've just described, we've kind of counted on in, I think it's item 9, in terms of, item 8, sorry, in terms of that third appendix of kind of member training and development. So there are elements of this that could be considered by members, actually, do I fulfil these requirements? But this governance review is particularly for the authority as a whole, and really we don't have an audit committee as such, so the Standards Committee has been prescribed that body that reviews this document. So yeah, it's not really a member individual one, it's more for the authority as a whole.
Okay. Any comments, members?
And then the final element, sorry Chairman, is the annual governance statement, which we've seen in the statement of accounts, and yes, again, this will be brought to you in March, an early point to review and get input on in a more thorough way.
Mr. Paisley.
I'd like to move the recommendations, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Second. Thank you, Mr. Ellicott. All those in favour? Which brings us on to the next and now final item, which is the overview of complaints and compliments.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to kind of almost take this item as read, really. The report sets out the complaints received in the past 6 months. Members will have seen the previous year's complaints in our corporate process review in July. So really, they're all set out there. I'm happy to take any questions on any individual ones, but it's actually a fairly low level of complaints that we see in front of us on this occasion.
So there are only 4 complaints? And no stage 2 complaints?
That is correct. This is for the period April to September 2024.
So for 6 months?
6 months, yeah. First 6 months being here.
That sounds quite good, really. I mean, a nice low level as opposed to a high level. Yeah. Any comments, members? Mr. Buckley.
Well, I mean, obviously 3 of the 4 are planning, failure to determine planning application within, it's really about planning and timelines, I think, time, and that we need to be mindful of that, and we should be aware that I think great strides have been made within the planning department, and we need to acknowledge that and be grateful for the work that has been undertaken, but nevertheless be aware of the fact that planning is a very public-facing function of this authority, possibly the most public one in many respects, and that we do have to be very mindful about how we appear to members of the public through the planning service, and bearing in mind what I see from other planning authorities, 4 complaints is over this period is tiny, but nevertheless we should always be aware of it, and it would be better if we had no complaints at all.
Clearly it would. And normally, I mean, there are quite a preponderance of complaints about planning issues. It's the nature of planning.
Absolutely.
And only 2 of them were upheld, which is better than 3.
Indeed.
So, any more comments? No?
Have to move the recommendations.
Thank you very much. Thank you. In favour? And that brings us to the end of the agenda, and thank you all very much for attending.
Thank you.